Hello and welcome to an Infinity the Game battle report. Today we're playing Combined Army versus Tohaa, and the scenario is Akial interference. And this video is going to be an interesting showcase, or at least I hope so, in how you can test different approaches to a scenario. Because in this game, my opponent Ed and I will each be trying out very different ways of playing the scenario. Just to provide some context there, Akial interference is one of the new scenarios released in ITS Season 17, so it's been around for a little while now, and like a lot of the ITS Season 17 scenarios, it offers quite a lot in terms of complexity around the scoring regime. The scenario asks you to do a lot and provides you with different ways of accomplishing it, with the main goal being that you are trying to score multiple classifieds, ideally at least one every round, from a semi-random distribution. At the beginning of the game, right before we start playing, after deployment, each player will draw two classifieds, pick one themselves to be their private, and then put the other down into the midfield where both players can access it. And then in rounds 2 and 3, you'll discard any existing classifieds that haven't been completed. You'll each draw two and pick one, and then put them back into the middle in the same process, so that every round you have your one private that you can do at some point over the course of the game, and then two classifieds that can each be accomplished by either player, but if they aren't accomplished that round, they're discarded. To add some further complexity, you get a little bit in the way of bonus points if you score at least one classified every round. There's an antenna in the midfield which you can activate to filter out classifieds and just replace them with random draws. Not ideal to do that because you have zero control over it, but you might choose to do so. There's no role required, you just need a specialist at the antenna. You might choose to do so if there's a classified that you just can't do. And then finally, and this is probably the most sticky and interesting and important part of the scenario, you can use the same antenna to make a willpower roll to cancel any one classified your opponent has completed that matches a classified with a signal that you have completed. And what that will usually mean is that at some point during the game, each of you will accomplish one of the classifieds that's available to both players in that round. Say telemetry drops, pretty easy to do telemetry, very likely that both of you will accomplish it before the end of the round. So you've both done that classified, so you both have a classified with a matching symbol. And then the first person that makes it to the central antenna and activates it to cancel their opponent's classified can take that classified away from their opponent. Now, they'll still count as having done a classified during that round for the bonus point, but that can be a significant swing in my experience. And because of the injection of complexity that that central antenna has, both by allowing you to cancel classifieds and filter the signal, there are potentially different ways each player could approach this scenario. And so, as we jump into the lists, we'll see the different ways that Ed and I are trying out approaching this scenario with our respective factions. This is my combined army list on screen now that I'll be playing today, and it's just a very small adjustment to a list that I published as part of my combined army faction focus on the channel earlier this month. And prima facie, this isn't really an Akial interference list. Conventional wisdom would probably say Akial interference wants you to accomplish classifieds. You win Akial interference by accomplishing classifieds. And so you should probably have the ability to do the maximum possible number of classifieds, being able to handle any drops that come down regardless of whether or not they demand hackers or doctors or engineers or chain of command or veteran or elite or close combat or decharges, etc. I am not doing that with this list. What I'm doing instead is aiming to accomplish one classified every round, but otherwise kind of approaching the scenario a little bit like it's Annihilation. That's not something that I'm certain works, but I want to test it because previous versions of, not Akial interference, it's a new scenario, but previous versions of do the classified scenarios have had a little bit of variance here. The very first do the classified scenario that ever existed was highly classified, and because there were just 4 classifieds and you had to do them, and if you couldn't do all of them, you could just lose the game, the old wisdom with regards, especially to highly classified, is that you need 20/20 coverage. You need to be able to do every single classified, because if you just can't do one of them and your opponent can, they can do that early, lock those points in, and then just win the game. But in subsequent versions of the Infinity Tournament System pack, Scenarios like countermeasures were released, which allowed a mulligan and rotating classifieds, and probably more than you could do in any given turn. And while classifieds did still demand a lot of coverage in countermeasures, you still need to be able to cover a lot of classifieds, I did find that I could approach countermeasures with probably less than complete coverage and kind of just do what I could every round and use any spare orders to secure kills. Now, my instinctive reading of Akial interference is that it sits closer to countermeasures than highly classified, but I wasn't sure by how much. And so we're doing basically the acid test version of how little can I get away with in terms of classified coverage by playing this list. It's not an Akial interference list, but if it can play Akial interference, that means the scenario has more flexibility than we might think. So, how does this list work? As noted, it's an adjustment to a list that I published as part of the Faction Focus for Combined Army, and how I have adjusted it is to basically try and do classifieds or mission objectives in any scenario, practically speaking. I think this can probably play any scenario. I'm trying to do mission objectives for as free as possible in terms of impost on my order school pool to free up orders to play aggressively against my opponent. And so the big change that has been made, the change from the list that I previously published, is that I have cut bit and kiss, which would have been unthinkable like a year ago. But the more I play with them in N5, the less they seem like they're performing. They're fine, but they are at best fine. Picture shots are very inconsistent on ballistic skill 11, and so I've dropped them from the list in this case, even though that leaves me with only one hacker, and I've replaced them with an M drone with tactical awareness. Secondly, using those points that I've freed up, I've turned an an Icadron, an 11-point baggage bot, into a Datarazi, which gives me 3 Datarazi in this list. That's in response to a pressure I found I was having with the prior version, where there are kind of 3 packages in this list that at least want or really like having smoke support dedicated to them. The first is the Vector operator, so the Vector, Unidron, and Nexus chain of command. For obvious reasons, this Vector needs to shoot through smoke. It's only ballistic skill 12, it's relying on heavily stacking modifiers, so it must have a Datarazi in support. Secondly, Sheshkin wants to aggro up the field and do a tremendous amount of damage, and although 24-inch range is pretty good, she's at her best in close combat. Like, she can gunfight very well, she's ballistic skill 15. But what you want to do at some point is to get her into CC, and you do have to gap close into 24 inches to at least take those gunfights. And so she really likes Datarazi as well. And then the final thing that I found, and which I didn't expect in early testing but came to conclude, is that this Umbra Legate and Overdron duo, which I have found I really, really like, it wants smoke support as well, because the Umbra Legate has stealth and is good in close combat, and so if you can just incidentally get the Umbra into CC, it will kill non-CC experts very reliably. And so it wants smoke too, and so turning an Icadron into a third Datarazi just means I can basically always have smoke support for each of those 3 modules, which makes the list play more smoothly. Now, how does the list play otherwise? Well, as noted, what we're trying to do is basically make sure that we can do mission objectives in any given scenario as freely as possible. And so in Combat Group 2, we have an Umbra Legate and an Overdron in a duo. There's also Datarazi, Ardrone, Libertos. But the goal here is to generally wash 6 or 7 orders through the Legate and the Overdron, doing useful things. Maybe that involves some hacking, maybe that involves getting into close combat and doing some hacking. Ho 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 ho, small pun there. But much of the time, what they'll be doing is just accomplishing mission objectives. In a scenario like superiority or unmasking, they'll get into the midfield and they'll press some buttons. But in a highly classified style scenario like Akial interference, the Legate is very efficient at doing classifieds. The Legate is an elite troop, and it's a medium infantry, and it's a hacker, and it has decharges, and theoretically it can accomplish Predator quite nicely, which actually means that just as one trooper, it has some of the best classified coverage in the entire game, and by strapping it to an Overdron, we have its tactical awareness order, the Overdron tactical awareness order, and then the other orders in the group to just do a bunch of classifieds every round. And the goal is the Umbra and the Overdron will do as many classifieds as they can, and they should usually be able to accomplish at least one each round. And then the M drone, generally speaking, is looking to also let me just do some mission objectives in any given game for free. Whether it's moving forward and pressing a button at some point, Or in Akial interference, potentially doing a classified itself, the goal is over the course of the game, it'll have 3 tack-aware orders, and it wants to spend all of those 3 tack-aware orders slowly progressing the scenario, plus maybe a regular or 2, and otherwise just kind of support the list in that way by relieving the need to spend orders out of the primary combat group on mission stuff. And if I can free up the need to spend orders in the primary combat group on mission stuff, I can spend orders in the primary combat group on Sheshkin or the Vector. But like, let's just be honest here. The goal is to be able to, at some point during the game, or multiple times during the game, spend 11 orders on Sheshkin. Because if you spend 22 orders on Sheshkin in the first 2 turns, you've probably won. You've probably just had her consume the entire enemy army. And so, in that vein, we're dropping this list into Akial interference to see if I can get away with a modest amount of scenario coverage and just play this like it's Annihilation, even into the teeth of a nominally fairly resilient army like Tohaa. And so, in stark contrast to my any scenario is Annihilation if you try hard enough approach, we have what is basically a highly classified list playing in Akial interference. This is a Tohaa list written by my friend Ed that is built to maximize its coverage. It's trying to have the ability to always do, to the maximum extent possible, every single classified. And so it's aiming to be able to probably do 2 classifieds around, or even 3 in some cases, if it can, and so just get too far ahead on scoring. Now, the practical limitation is this list has the ability to do those classifieds, but classifieds still take orders. And one of the limitations we've all been increasingly finding with Tohaa in N5 is that they just aren't an order efficient faction anymore. They have, practically speaking, 0 access to NCO, 0 access to tactical awareness. Those skills do exist in the faction, but you're not taking them in a list because they're on bad profiles. You can usually make some decent use of the Lieutenant Order, which does help, but then it's also a faction that's just 4/4 move everywhere. A lot of other factions, we see heavy infantry in them. Heavy infantry kind of cost very comparably to Tohaa models these days because of the discount that you see associated with being hackable. I can get higher quality HI than Tohaa Symbio armor models now, and those higher quality HI are hackable, but they're also basically all 6/2 move, and lots of them will have access to some tactical awareness or NCO, and be duo or Haris linkable. That's also a thing that every faction can access a little bit of fireteam play. And so the things that made Tohaa unique, which were lots of fireteams and lots of wounds, so they had a tendency to hold onto their orders over the course of the game and be almost as strong in round 3 as they were in round 5. And getting order efficiency from having fire teams to make up for the lack of things like NCO and tactical awareness, a lot of that has just kind of receded. I still like Tohaa. I still like a lot of things they can do. I think they can do things that are unique and cool and interesting. But they do kind of need a little bit of attention, I think, from the developers, because they've just been overtaken by changes to the game's design philosophy that have never really applied to them. Bluntly, I would love to see Tohaa buffed a little bit, because it's enormously beneficial to the game to have these like weird and interesting outside context factions that don't operate the way everyone else does. Having that point of variety and novelty is just super cool. I don't want them to be overpowered, but they're struggling, languishing a little bit right now, and I want them to be better than that, because they should be appealing and interesting, and just good enough that people look at them from time to time and go, yeah, that's cool, I want to give that a shot, rather than just being the bastion of holdouts who are desperately waiting for the dog warrior to come along and maybe solve all of their problems. Anyway, commentary notwithstanding, this is a highly classified Tohaa list. Highly classified is a scenario that was historically difficult for Tohaa because they had to compromise a ton to get all of the models they need into it, but this list does it. So in Combat Group 2, we have a Diplomatic Delegate, a Libertos, a Chaxa Auxilia, a Grief Operator, a War Driver with Disco Ball, and a Clipsos. Lots of classified potential here. In fact, this group alone can probably do a significant chunk, possibly even the majority of classifieds in the game. The Greif Operator is an impersonator with decharges, and so can do sabotage trivially, and it has a visor. The War Driver is, of course, a hacker. We've got a forward observer, a sensor, and then just spare irregular orders on the Delegate and the Libertos are used to do things like move forward and project an eraser zone, or lay, well, this Libertos can't lay some mines, but it can do things like go into suppressive fire. Now, I do think it's a little bit of a mistake to have the War Driver in this combat group. I acknowledge why the War Driver is here. You want to be able to do hacking classifieds, and there just aren't a lot of choices in Tohaa to accomplish that. And the War Driver has the notable advantage of being the hardest hacker Tohaa can access to kill by the enemy. Zero Pain has a good chance of keeping it safe or obnoxiously difficult to kill against a regular Trinity attack. And that's important in a scenario like Akial interference because the hacking objective might not drop until turn 3. But that means the War Driver needs to be ready to jump on that when the time comes, and so I think it should actually be in Combat Group 1 in this case, just so that it can always have the orders that it needs to do classifieds if it needs to. Combat Group 2, the larger of the two combat groups in this case, that's where the War Driver I think should be, has two. Nope, it's comprised of three separate triads. The first is a Gaurail, a Kriegel, and a Kumatail. Ed loves his Kriegels, and with very good reason, having both Mirror Ball in a link team and a Razor in a link team and a grenade launcher and etc. Just a very good troop for 22 points. It's a packet of utility. It provides part of that Tohaa defensive package that they need, and is one of the few things that is really unique about Tohaa is Ferroware. And I believe a Gaurail is present here mostly just because it's a visor. It's also cheaper than a Suquel HMG would be, which would be the model I would generally expect to see at the tip of a spear in a triad, but Ed has been observing that Suquels are just kind of okay these days, and yeah, I agree, relative to their points cost, they're just a fine gunfighter, but they don't outperform anything that exists in any other faction, they're not necessarily unique, and they have a little bit of difficulty punching up into certain things, and they're a bit too expensive to be used just to prey on stuff that's weaker than them. So the Gaurail Spitfire is a slightly cheaper option and can do slightly more classified than the Suquel HMG. We then have a Suquel Lieutenant Forward Observer, another Kriegel, and a Kursail Engineer. Again, plenty of classified coverage here. The Suquel Lieutenant is a fantastic choice here. It can do a ton of classifieds, being a Forward Observer and a veteran troop and having decharges, etc. And then finally, just as a backstop, we have Suquel K1 Sniper in a fire team with a Kael'tar chain of command with two symbiomates. Expensive, but can be very worthwhile. There are multiple models here that want those symbiomates, and then just a regular Kael'tar. I am really happy to see this profile come back into lists. It's been a little bit difficult to include, but I've always really liked lists that manage to get three different symbiomates present, and so very happy to see this here. Overall, the goal with this list is to be able to do the maximum number of classifieds possible, ideally front-loading your scenario points so that if you fall behind later you have that cushion, and it's going to be doing them primarily by using excellent Tohaa vision control. There are two models in this group that have the ability to, in zone of control, quite reliably create a zero visibility eclipse zone, so it should always be able to maneuver wherever on the board it needs to accomplish classifieds, and then potentially pull back to some safety or establish a defensive position behind the Kriegel agent Ferroware. So, jumping into the game, Ed wins the lieutenant role and chooses to go first, and so I will be deploying second on the right side of the table over here. In terms of Ed's deployment, the fire team with the Corsair Engineer, Kriegel Operative, and Suquel Lieutenant will be deployed in and around this position on the rooftops and ground level. The fire team with the Gaurail Spitfire will be deployed similarly here, and then the fire team with the Suquel Sniper will be deployed all the way back, with the Suquel standing on this rooftop, with some quite good fire lanes over the rooftops here, and these rooftops are very accessible. It may not be completely obvious from this picture, but there are ladders just everywhere. I've marked a bunch of them as we see here. Every single one of these buildings has like 3 or 4 ladders on it, so there's tons of vertical accessibility on this table. And the Suquel Sniper can see much of the rooftops, although there are some higher level pieces that make it more difficult to necessarily see everything. But then the other important line that the Suquel has is it's got a line all the way down to the center of the table where the Akial interference button console thing is here, and then also a line down to there blocking this aggress up the table. In terms of other deployment, the Libertos is going to be hanging out here, guarding a pair of HVTs. The other two HVTs will be positioned nooked in behind this table quarter here, so Ed has split his 4 HVTs up into a 2 and 2 party, and then the Clipsos will be hidden deployed just down here, near overlooking the Akial antenna, ready to potentially move in multiple different ways, although it won't reveal itself until quite late into the game. For my part, I'm trying to deploy to be a little bit wary of Bob, and also to just present some ARO threats. And so we're using the Overdrawn as a little bit of an ARO piece in this case. Now, it's not a dangerous ARO element. It's a single ballistic skill 13 shot, but provided I keep it safe from the K1 sniper, most of the rest of Ed's guns don't really want to fight it. He could fight it with a Panzerfaust, but he can't really fight it with his Gaurail because it has Albedo, and there just aren't any guns up here that are particularly threatening to it at long range other than a linked Burst 1 Panzerfaust. So I have the Overdrawn watching this fairly long line up here. Prone on the rooftop ahead of it is the Umbra Legate, and then nooked in behind it are a Datarazi and an Imatron. There's another Datarazi back here, ready to move up and throw smoke, so a fair bit of our smoke coverage is in this location, because the extra fire team is hanging around here. The extra is at ground level, it has fallen off of the table, and therefore off of its base, which looks a little bit weird there, but it's got a line from its base all the way up here, which I want to use to control movement through this part of the table, although of course Ed has lots of Eclipse, which just circumvents the extra, but anything that requires him to spend orders is good. Sheshkin herself is prone back here. She's behind this terrain piece, but she's quite comfortably nooked in there. She's got good line of sight to anything that might be threatening the extra fire team. They're covering her in turn, so she's not hugely threatened. The M drone and the third Datarazi are hanging around here. There is a single Imatron over here, and I was kind of hoping that this Imatron might serve as bait because my reserve drop is my Libertos Mine Layer. My Libertos Mine Layer is my reserve drop because Ed's reserve drop is an impersonation marker, but it ends up deploying just conservatively here. And while Ed has played a generic Khitan imposter against me in the past, I didn't worry about that in this scenario. What I expected instead was either a Greif because it has decharges and a visor, or, a bit more concerning, Jan Star because he's a character. Now, Star can't do anything else, but he can do anything that requires a character, and he's more dangerous in 2 wounds, which means he can kind of blow through a Libertos checkpoint sometimes if he needs to, but still the Libertos is my best deployment counter, and so the Libertos deploys to try and respond to this impersonation marker, but the impersonation marker is well placed. There is a ladder that it can crawl down there, and it's got multiple other escape paths, so I can't just pinch it in with a mine and a Libertos marker, so instead I just use the Libertos to block off, and its mine to block off some downward ladders to try and just keep this thing on the rooftop. Finally, my Sasha is deployed over here. She rolls up nothing, a flamethrower, maybe? It will not matter the entire game. And all 4 of my HVTs are deployed in a nook here. This is not impossible to access. It's a little bit more central than I would like, and anything needing zone of control can get it from this side of the building. But sooner or later, there will be something that requires accessing a HVT with line of sight, and I'm looking to have lots of coverage over this rooftop to make that difficult. Now, round 1 begins, and this is probably the point where luck plays the largest role in the game, because the 2 classifieds you draw at the very beginning have really significant impacts, because what you want to do usually, especially if you're going second, is you want to draw 1 classified that's really easy, which you keep private, secret, and safe, and 1 classified which sucks ass, because you're about to give that to your opponent to try and do, and you want to make it hard for them. Conversely, if you're going first, you really want 2 classifieds that are really easy, because you're about to try and probably do your private one much of the time, and you want to also be able to do the other one if you can. What I have found often happens, often is a bit of a subjective term there, I have not played Akial that much, but what I have found has happened in every game of Akial I've played so far up until this one, is that both players did their private classified on the first turn because it was the easiest classified to do. Now, in this case, I think I probably got a close to ideal draw because I drew Sabotage, which is very easy for me to do and also easy for Ed to do, so I keep that private, and Mapping, which is the shittiest scenario in the entire game. I hate having to do mapping because it requires you to get all the way to your opponent's deployment zone, and usually it's very limited. What I find is pretty common is that there'll be some scenario terrain pieces that are not completely in the deployment zone. So for example, when I flopped Mapping, the pieces in my objective zone that Ed could do were this building, but not this building because it just peeked out past the deployment zone. And then similarly, these two buildings were okay, but this building was not because it peeked out past the opponent's deployment zone. I'll be honest here, I didn't even pick a building. I can't remember if you need to choose a building when mapping is drawn. I don't think you do, but I was just like, I'm never doing that. I can't be fucked doing mapping. I'm not going to try. Mapping is a honeypot. And so I just dropped mapping into the midfield and made it Ed's problem while I picked sabotage. Ed, for his part, got HBT follow-up, which is a fairly easy one to do, and he would accomplish on the first turn, and then the HVT espionage, which theoretically he can do. And so he probably doesn't hate seeing that, because if he's going to get HVT espionage onto the table, he can do that potentially on the first turn, even if it's a bit awkward, but he would probably have loved to have seen, for example, potentially telemetry, because he can do telemetry relatively easily, or any of the ones that he could do quite easily. He would have loved to have seen sabotage, for example. Sabotage and HVT follow-up would have been perfect for him, because he can do sabotage really easily, and he can do HVT follow-up quite easily, and so he can get 2 on the first turn. So what we're playing for on round 1 is follow-up for Ed, sabotage for me, and then mapping and espionage for both. Ed's got 2 main lines of maneuver here, and he's going to actually try and do mapping, the mad lad. And he will be, I think, the second person... No, sorry. Technically, I think the only person I have ever succeeded do mapping ever has been Ed, and this will be his second time accomplishing it. I'm going to strip 1 order from each of his combat groups, which is going to end up really mattering, because the minor combat group is going to try and do HVT espionage. The war driver is somewhere in the midfield. It's just going to peek up and around here. It's going to end up behind this crate over here. And because I stripped a regular order from that combat group, it's going to have, after converting irregulars, 1 order. To attempt, it'll lay some disco along the way to make the path easy for the primary combat group. It's going to have 1 order to do HVT espionage. That's a coin flip. He rolls the dice. He doesn't get a 10, so he doesn't get it. But the war driver is now in the midfield. And this, I feel, is probably an error. Even though my list has no killer hackers, the war driver is kind of important. Ed rolled the dice to try and get an extra classified this turn. He would have done 3 if he'd made that roll, but the risk was a little bit high for me. However, the war driver moving forward, laying some disco, etc., plus some other disco from the Kriegel agent in this combat group, allows this group to progress. Now, there are some AROs they have to contend with, but they will just use a lot of Eclipse to get through it. That's not where the Eclipse actually went down, but you get the rough idea. To move all the way up and around here, do a quick pit stop here to zone of control HVT follow up one of my HVTs with the bio. I think he uses not the bio engineer, he uses the Whip 14 engineer. Gets a little bit spotlight moving through here, tries to shrug it off but can't, comes up and around here, accomplishes mapping on this building, and gets into a little bit of a defensive position here, and uses the last order of the game, which is the lieutenant order. He's previously had the engineer try and recover engineering from one of the models, failed the roll. That means that the the Corsair, we got there in the end, that makes the Corsair engineer the link leader, which means that when, as the last order of the turn, the Suquail commando spends its LT order, it leaves the fire team but will rejoin for free. And so it, as the last order, is going to just peek around here, take a shot at this Datarazi, put it unconscious, end its order prone, having secured a kill, and done 2 classifieds with an attempt to have done a 3rd. Pretty solid first turn. The problem with this as a first turn for Ed is that it kind of perfectly positions me to also have the first turn that I want, because I'm going into this with nearly full bottle, I'm down a single order, and the big problem with this fire team dive is that it's positioned them very close to me. And so here's what we're going to do. First things first, I do still need to accomplish some classifieds. We're going to have some smoke laid by impetuous Datarazis around here. Unfortunately, Sheshkin Smoke Caddy is currently unconscious, but that's fine. And the Legate and Overdrawn Fire team are going to move up and around through here. The Legate is going to strap a decharge to this tall building. That accomplishes the first classified for me. That's my private. And then, spending like 2 orders to accomplish it, he will also accomplish HVT espionage on one of Ed's HVTs over here. That leaves me with a couple of orders free in that combat group, which is useful and will matter later. However, okay, cool. I've done what I wanted to do with this list there. The Overdrawn and the Legate, using tactical awareness, have pushed forward and accomplished 2 mission objectives. That's actually the same number as Ed has, although I could have, if Ed had done 3, I would be behind, but 2 is totally fine. And Sheshkin has 10 orders to spend, and she's going to. or close to. I think she spends 9 this turn. And so she begins moving. She's going to move up and around here. She's going to get into line of sight. She's going to blitz through line of sight of the Panzerfaust and shotgun armed engineer. She's going to take that face-to-face roll. The Panzerfaust on 0 range, I'm in cover because of the narrow screen. 2 dice on 9s is still scary, but I am 4 dice on 18s because he's targeted, and I cut sick into him and do a ton of hits. Now, Ed has a terrible habit at one point during the game, any game I play against Ed, there will be some point where a symbio mate fails him terribly and he puts a model unconscious through Armor 9 total immunity, but it's not going to happen this game. Perhaps the secret sauce is having 3 symbio mates. But, so the engineer takes a volley of hits at damage 5, survives because of its symbio mate, and it pulls back into cover. Sheshkin then whips around into this war driver. I walk through line of sight of the sniper here. I don't care. My plan is actually to get hit and it won't matter, and guts out of line of sight. Tragically, the sniper misses, but I eat the hacker completely all the way to death, and so Sheshkin is now on 4 wounds. It begins. Now, the bad news for me is that Ed does something very clever here, which is that he just does not try and face-to-face Sheshkin. Instead, the war driver places a cyber mine. And I have to stop and be like, Ed, what do they do? I should know this. I've got them in my faction. What do cyber mines do? And we look it up. Cyber mines require you to reset, not dodge. And if they hit, they inflict 2 rolls against your BTS with a quite impressive damage. Which means that Sheshkin has like a 40% chance of just being stunned by this cyber mine. And I don't want that to happen. Now, it won't permanently disable her. She's not hackable. But cyber mines can still stun biological targets. And so that's really clever. Like a 40% chance to just end the run there causes me a great deal of grief. So, alright, we have to solve that. A couple of things. The first is we will spend 1 order. We got some impetuous smoke down here, so the extra is just going to jet up and take a face-to-face roll. It will win. I take the risk and do this out of cover. I want the orders to be efficient. It wins the face-to-face roll against the K1 sniper. The sniper, again, it takes, I think, 3 armor and 2 BTS saves because I crit it. It passes all of them because of the symbiomate, and it drops prone because it wants none of that smoke. That frees up Sheshkin. Now I have to solve the cybermine issue, and so the Libertos that was hanging out back here moves up the ladder. The Greif operator, I don't know it's a Greif, but I know it's a Greif. The Greif operator holds, and then as my second short skill, I move again into detonation range of the mine in a position where it can't detonate on Sheshkin. It does detonate on Libertos. I take the hit, I drop prone. Now, in retrospect, I could have avoided all of this. There's actually a relatively easy way to do so. Sheshkin could have just kind of like moved. Actually, I'm not sure if this is legal. Sheshkin could have moved through all of the space around the war driver and stopped it from having any legal spot to place the mine. But the mine is placed in resolution, so I think it can always place it. Similarly, I think it's possible that Ed might have made it impossible. It might have been able for Ed to make it impossible for me to avoid having Sheshkin detonate it by having it right next to her. But there was a little bit of a gap in this case, and so I could do that with the Libertos. I think the counterplay there is maybe that Sheshkin is prone. Doesn't matter. Practical. What happened on the game table was the Libertos was able to detonate the cyber mine. That means Sheshkin is free to continue moving, so she comes around here, and at this point she is engaging a targeted Kriegel agent, a targeted engineer out of cover, and that means she's rolling 21s to hit, which is very good. It's very good when that happens. The agent just decides to sacrifice his life for the cause to try and cover the engineer. That does no particular good because Sheshkin just yeets forward and gets into close combat and consumes it entirely. So they're both dead, and then on the last order of the turn, up and over the top into the Sukryo Commando. Second last order, actually, I think it might survive. No, it face-to-faces with the bomb. We put it down as well, and so Sheshkin has just gone through a significant portion of Ed's army. So the dust clears, Ed goes into his second turn. I've left Sheshkin standing because she's got 4 wounds. I'll just dodge if that K1 sniper decides to shoot her. I would happily let Ed spend the entire turn shooting at Sheshkin and not accomplish anything. As it happens, the objective flop is not going to be particularly good for him. I'm going to draw something and data scan, and I will happily put data scan into the middle of the table because Ed doesn't have a hacker anymore, so I hate pick. Ed, for his part, does the same thing. He draws 2 different ones, and HVT inoculation is the one that he chooses because I can't accomplish that. But from a realistic perspective, and Ed knows this, we actually had a long discussion back and forth about the 2 different options that he had. He went with HV inoculation in the end after talking it through because had he done the other option. I can't remember what it was, but I would have been able to accomplish it and kind of easily. I think it was telemetry, actually. Like you can't drop telemetry. I'm going to do it by accident during his turn, probably. So even if he can do it, it's not worth it. In the end, he drops HVT inoculation, but that's really difficult to do. And so we actually at this point end up workshopping what the heck does he do with this turn? And the answer that we come to actually leads me a little bit more toward my conclusion that you can underinvest in this scenario just a little bit as long as you always have a practical plan. Because what Ed can do this turn is to go after the antenna and start filtering things out. Not filtering, sorry, start cancelling classifieds. Now, he doesn't have a ton of orders. His options are limited and he needs smoke to get through my AROs, but smoke he does, and over the course of several orders, what he'll be able to do is get this fire team with the bioengineer through and around to the antenna. And having gotten there, a couple of rolls later, he will cancel my classified HVT espionage because it shares a symbol with mapping, which he has done. That puts him up now on classifieds, and I can't cancel him back because I no longer count as having done that. Is that an ideal turn? Nope, it's definitely not fantastic, but half of the army has been eaten by Sheshkin, and we're in damage control mode on the Tohaa side. In fact, things are grim enough that with the very small number of orders in Combat Group 2, the Greif kind of just rolls the dice. He reveals, the Libertos just laser mine in response to him, the Greif puts the Libertos to dogged, and then basically has to just attempt to kill the Libertos so that he can re-impersonate. Actually, he ends up just dying. I don't think the Libertos crits him, but he dies to the mine. He puts the Libertos all the way to dead. And that's a horrible trade that Ed took just because rolling the dice might have given him a chance to get back into the game later. I think there's actually an argument that potentially he just leaves the impersonator completely free and doesn't do anything with it and hopes to save it. But even then, like, what do you do? Where do you put it? You have to get it into a position where it might do a classified, and the Libertos, if he leaves it alone, the Libertos will discover layer mine next turn or discover shoot next turn, and then I'll just go after it with something. So not unreasonable. You play your outs, even if your outs are a bad dice roll. Still, Ed is technically up on points as we move into my second turn. So, dead Libertos here, and I'm looking to do data scan and inoculation, except of course I can't do inoculation. And so this is where we get to see the M-drone show its quality. Last turn it used its tactical awareness order to move forward, so it's staged up here. And while Ed has a defensive position nooked in and around here, I think the bioengineer is a little bit exposed on the console. We can make an assault in on that, and we can potentially access the console. So, what are we going to do? We're going to have Sheshkin go on a tear again, because I have all of these orders that I can spend on her. So there will be two lines of advance. The first will be that Sheshkin's going to come up and around here, and the M-drone will come up and over the rooftop. Sheshkin will annihilate the bioengineer, and then I will faff around a little bit trying to do data scan with the Umbra Legate. It's not particularly easy. It's actually a difficult classifier to do when you are facing someone that's not unconscious, and I keep leaving things either all the way dead or alive. And so the Legate wastes a couple of orders before I'm like, hang on, hold up. I should just see what I'm going to do with this antenna. And so the M-drone then continues its path. It only takes its tactical awareness order and then one other regular order to come over this building and then down, filter the signal, doesn't require a roll, and I get rid of HVT inoculation and draw, drumroll please, Predator. And then the red mist descends. I was actually a little bit concerned at the beginning of this turn. Like, I'm probably not at risk of putting Ed into retreat. It's unlikely. Tohaa tend to store their points quite well. I know there's plenty of things around here that are expensive, but let's just be a little bit careful. Anyway, then Predator dropped and all bets are off. We're going on a tear, boys. And so there will be a couple of kills that are secured. Sheshkin's going to run around here. She's going to kill the Kriegel agent and the Gal rail. It's actually going to be kind of funny. She will move in, she'll kill the Kriegel agent, she'll get in on the Gal rail, and then I will roll and be like, aha, a 9 and a 12. Neither of those are crits, but that's fine. And then Ed will roll like a 13. I'm like, okay, cool, 4 saves. And he's like, I rolled a 13. And I just had this moment of shocking cognitive dissonance where I had to contemplate the fact that Sheshkin had not won a face-to-face roll in close combat. It was very embarrassing. I took my save and did not take a wound, and then killed the Galrail. I think it took a couple more orders because he did have a symbiomate. Meanwhile, with the remaining orders in combat group, I actually think I used a gun to kill the Kriegel agent because I didn't want to get within 8. So that's only one predator kill. However, around this corner, we will then have the overdrawn escort the legate around. The overdrawn will move into position. It will then next order declare discover against the Libertos. Ed doesn't respond. I move away. The legate moves forward. I succeed the discover on 16s, and then the legate just into close combat with the Libertos and kills all the way to dead. So that does Predator, which means I've done a classified this round, did not do data scan, tried and failed, and there's nothing left to data scan anyway. Everything is dead. I think I try a couple of times, or one more time, moving the legate up to here to try it on the sniper on this rooftop, but once again, no successes. So we get into round 3, and yeah, Ed is hemorrhaging at this point. Ed places suspected infiltration. I place HVT identity check. Actually, no, other way around, and that is meaningful. Ed places identity check because he can maybe potentially do it. He does have a trooper with a sensor still alive, and I place suspected infiltration because I would love Ed to move into base contact with some of my troops that I have sitting in and around this area. So that's just kind of a nightmare to do, but over the course of this turn, Ed is actually going to accomplish that one. It's not an easy turn. The details actually elude me at this point, but there is some, because there's no smoke left anywhere. But there is some very careful movement down and around here. A cautious move, actually, I think, to get out of Sheshkin's line of sight. And then what will eventually happen is that the sniper debarking its tower will have to come around into base contact with the legate. It will actually survive and the close combat attack and make the suspected infiltration roll, which then Ed succeeds, but that's basically all he has in the tank to do this turn. He does sort of like think about whether he can do identity check. The problem with identity check is that it requires line of sight, and so even if this Chucksa had a perfect run, it just doesn't have enough orders to get all the way across these rooftops and then to see the HVTs while doing other stuff. And so that leaves me very, very free on my final turn. I need to do suspected infiltration. I've got multiple ways to accomplish that. I think the legate accomplishes it in the end. And then identity check I can do with the M drone that I still have sitting around down here. Ed will try and pop his Clipsos out of surprise, out of hidden deployment, to stop the M drone at this point, but I just have to detour away and kill it with Sheshkin before the M drone can continue its journey. And this second HVT over here, I can identity check. And so at the end of the game, I did have the presence of mind to take a photo. We can see Ed has done HVT follow-up, I have done sabotage. On round 1, Ed did mapping, I did HVT espionage, but it was cancelled. No one did inoculation, I did predator, no one did data scan, no one did, I did identity on round 3, I did identity check, and I did HV suspected infiltration, and Ed did suspected infiltration, which means that in total, Ed's got 3 classifieds, and I've got 4, but I also have the point for having done one on every round. I don't actually know what the points are, I'd have to go back and check, but that is a win, and it's a win with enough points to count as a major victory, which is an interesting validation of the idea that if your list is good enough, you can potentially play Akial a little bit like Annihilation. I am definitely prepared to concede that I think there could be some games, especially where, like, if the legate gets killer hackered far too early, he's pretty difficult to put down. He's duoed with a tin bot. But if the legate gets KHD'd and you just see hacking classified for the rest of the game, you could be in a really bad time. So there's probably some argument for not playing this as much like Annihilation as I have, but it is interesting to limit test. It's interesting to see what options exist and how you can play, and especially the turn 2, where we confirmed that there was practically no way for Ed to do any classifieds that turn, and so he went after and cancelled my classified instead. That was really cool. It kind of shows that there's always something you can do in the scenario, which helps if you are not fully specialized. So if you're playing Ariadna, for example, and it's like, I don't want to put a hacker in this list. I'm playing Tartary Army Corps. It's not my jam. You may actually be better off than you think, provided you have decent coverage otherwise, and you can go after and spend orders either killing your opponent's classified doers, maybe just by spec fire with naval werfers, for example, or pressing the button to cancel classifieds that have already been done. Because generally speaking, both players will accomplish some classifieds on the first turn, because they'll have their private. and they'll have the maximum possible number of specialists on the first turn, I think it's probably not uncommon to have at least some ability to start cancelling classifieds from turn 2 onward. So there should always be some out that you can pursue in the scenario, even if you have, say, an Ariadne list with no hacker, which is promising. I wouldn't mind a little bit more if I were redesigning the scenario, maybe a little bit more in terms of generating those classifieds on the first turn. The fact that it's draw one, pick one, and then pick one effectively, because the one that you don't pick as your private always goes into the midfield, is a blessing and a curse. It's very good for the second player because you just want trash there on the first turn so your opponent can't do them. Actually, probably that's fine. Now that I think about it, I'm totally okay with that. I want the second player not to be badly disadvantaged because otherwise this is kind of a go first scenario. The advantage otherwise to the second player is that they tend to have the best chances to cancel enemy classifieds, but I need to play a little bit more before I decide how much. That's actually a practical advantage because the window is relatively limited. The window that the second player enjoys that the first player doesn't have is only after they've done a classified on their turn before the next round begins. So if you can cancel a classified right there and then, if you can do it and then cancel your opponent that they accomplished the turn before immediately after, that is a second player advantage. But golly, that does sound a little bit harder to do in practice than in theory. Either way, this was a cracking game, very interesting. I definitely think Ed could potentially draw back on the specialization. And just to jump back to the first turn, I think if I'm playing Tohaa in this side, there's a pretty good argument for playing the first turn, like the entire first turn, entirely different, even with the same lists. This is a line that I would have been interested in pursuing, and playing the game out infinite times, I would certainly have seen. Ed's list has got 2 fire teams with spec fire in it, which means that it can almost always posture a ballistic skill 12 grenade launcher to go somewhere. I think the way to play this from Ed's perspective on the first turn, or at least a way to play it, is to move forward, do the HVT classified, and then pull back into defensive positions and just use any spare orders to fire grenades. Go after Datarazi, go after the Extra, go after emotes, hell, go after Imatrons. They can't dodge, just shoot them. Get that little bit of attritional advantage that takes some of the wind out of my sails, and leave yourself in a position where your models are pulled back to positions of safety so that Sheshkin doesn't get to do what she did, which is pinball between a huge number of troops, scoring 4 very significant kills on the first turn. Like the damage that Sheshkin did won the game effectively. Like as much as we played out, that's just not recoverable. It's too many orders and she's picked up wounds and I'm not behind on classifieds. That first turn was a fucking catastrophe. But if the Tohaa player in this case does one mission objective and then pulls back and then makes plays with grenades that make me miserable and have to both move further with fewer orders, I think it's in a much better spot. So that's just if you're a Tohaa player wondering what the heck you're supposed to do in this scenario. I'm just going to leave that as a consideration because I think that's an interesting possible alternate line of play. Anyway, that wraps up today's video. Hope very much that you've enjoyed this. Quick channel plug. Please like, please subscribe, and if you aren't already, please consider becoming a member on YouTube or a supporter via the Buy Me a Coffee page. You can support either as one-off donations or by becoming a long-term donor, and I very much appreciate all of them, and I take requests for battle reports, faction focuses, and other videos, and add them to the backlog whenever someone in any of those groups requests. So thank you very much as always to all of my supporters. Hope very much that you've enjoyed this, and I will see you next time.